All right, hello everyone, how's it going? We are here in the scene shop by special permission with the great professional scenic painter and Niagara University alum, Anna Krempels.
Hello.
And we're going to be doing some scene painting techniques for you. So what we've done is we've gotten some scrap pieces of Luan plywood here and we've base coated them with a white, and we're going to demonstrate some of the different scene painting techniques. Want to go ahead?
Okay, welcome. Today we're going to teach you how to do a scumble. The idea of scenic painting is to create different textures to emulate different surfaces and textures. So a scumble is a kind of wet blend technique, and you take two different colors. What you're going to do, two brushes too. And what you're going to do is you're going to kind of like blend them together in little X marks like this. And what you want to do is try to maintain that hatching texture so that you don't get too much in like one direction. It doesn't really, if you can see the difference here, this is a little bit more of a blend than this. So we want to get a hint of all that color everywhere.
All right, so the next technique we're going to do is what's known as wet blending. It's very similar to the scumble, where we're using two different brushes, right? So I'm going to lay in, and oftentimes a wet blend is directional. It goes horizontally in this case. And then we're going to lay in the other color right next to it, right? And then we can very gradually blend those two colors together. Now this is a technique that's oftentimes used in backdrops when we're painting sunsets and things like that, and landscapes and those kind of things. We're going to get all sorts of, and there it is. Pretty quick and easy.
The next technique we are going to go through is called sponging, and we use sponges to sponge. Sponging is used to create a different kind of texture as a scumble. It's often a background of another technique that you're going to use. But also,
Usually, oftentimes on a wall texture or something like that, or stone texture, we'll use a lot of the sponging techniques on it.
Yes, stone and interior walls. So what you do is you take one sponge with one color. I'm going to start with the yellow. And you're going to take a palette. This is just a tray. Get some of that extra stuff off of there. And then very evenly, you're going to sponge around your space. And the trick of this is it's really easy to just sponge in one place and you get a specific pattern. Do you see that? They all look the same. So you want to always move around your sponge.
So make sure as you're doing that you're not turning it when it's on the surface,
right,
or you end up with
that
kind of thing.
And that look nice. Yeah. So I'm going to do the other color on top of that, the red.
So there's two ways to do this. You could do this with while the colors are wet and allow them to blend together, or let the previous coat entirely dry and then do the other color over top of that.
Gryffindor.
These Gryffindor colors.
With painting, any kind of like water-based, oil-based paint that you're going to use, it's always easier to do the lighter colors first because they're harder to cover the darker colors if you have to go back. So see how this is getting just a little bit more muddy when you put the yellow back on top of the red. If you start with the yellow, it depends on what look you're going for, but just always remember that it's easier to cover lighter colors with darker colors than to cover darker colors with lighter colors.
All right, so the next technique is a feather duster technique. So this is an actual feather duster that you could buy at any like Walmart or whatever that's used for dusting furniture off and such, but this one's actually made out of ostrich feathers, so it's actual feathers in this feather duster.
It's not vegan.
It's not at all. Neither are the sponges, for that matter. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to dip this in my paint, try to wipe off some of the excess, then go on my palette and kind of work a little bit of that into the different fibers of the feather duster, or the different feathers, right? All right, and then I'm going to take that, very similar to sponge, I'm going to put that all the way across my the surface of my flat, or whatever surface I'm texturing. All right, so you see how it's given me a, I've run out of paint. It's given me a texture here. It's a little bit different of a look than what we would get with the sponge and with the scumble, right?
And David, what types of things can we use feather dusting for?
Well, funny you should ask. This I've used on sets for wallpaper. I've also used it for to get a grass texture. And I also did a production of Jungle Book where it was set on a jungle gym. And we covered the entire floor with a feather dust, 4 coats of feather duster technique to make the floor look like it was mulch around the jungle gym of the set. So, all right, so here I got this. I only have 1 feather duster, so I'm going to rinse this. So then the next part is to then go in with another color and add that texture in there as well. All right. So we're going to blend these two together. Now these two colors, we chose these two colors because there is a high contrast between the two colors and you can really see the difference of them. Oftentimes they're in value, the colors are going to be a lot closer to each other when we're using them on a set. But this is just for demonstration purposes here. So, and I'm going to do a little mixed color in here as well, just to give it a little pizzazz. That's a little heavy there, it's getting muddy. Not real. And there you go.
Okay, next we're going to learn about dry brushing. So typically when we paint, it's always a good idea to wet your brush first. So when you get to the wet blend, I mean, it's in the name. You want to have a wet brush and you're putting wet paint on wet paint. With dry brushing, you take a dry brush and you put wet paint on dry paint. Okay, so I just prepped a little bit of area here so that I can show you the way one paint color looks over another, like almost like a wood grain effect. But for now, I'm just going to dip my dry brush into the paint, and really I like to just get the tip of it, put paint on the tip of that, and then you're going to really lightly just brush it over the paint here, over the dry paint here. You might need to reload.
And you're really wiping off a lot of the excess paint, so you barely have any on there.
Yeah, and the idea for this, it's really tricky. It takes a lot of practice, but you want to get as even as you can. So for here, for instance, it's a little more even over here, and then this is more of a wet, kind of a, what's that? Blotch? So, yeah, try to get it as even as you can. Now I'm going to go over with the red, get as much of that paint off as I can. And you can see the red on the white. Look at that. Put the red on the red. See, that's almost like a wet blend dry brush because they're still wet. But then essentially, when you go into more of your wood grains, you're going to be doing it over an existing color. So we'll see that here. It's all about that even pressure.
Okay, so the last technique is a spatter technique. So just a word of warning on this one is that this one kind of gets everywhere because we're literally throwing paint onto our canvas here. So one of the things we did is we took our paint and we added a little bit of water to it and made it a little bit of more of a runny consistency so it worked much better for our spatter. All right, so I'm going to take some of this paint on here. I'm gonna wipe most of it off. And then I'm going to flick, I'm trying not to get it on my shoes because I didn't wear my paint shoes, but we're gonna get this spatter technique on here. So this is one method of spatter technique. This one isn't as thin as I usually like it, but that's okay. All right, I'm gonna add a little water to this. You can go ahead and do your go.
And when you're spattering, you want to make sure there's not too much paint on your brush, or you could end up with like big like lines like that to make it directional. If that's something you want to do, that's great. But normally, be aware of just trying to get the even dots everywhere rather than the trails.
All right, I think I got this consistency better where I like it. All right, so the trick with this technique is to actually just to try to get it even across the canvas, which takes a little bit of practice on it. Usually, if you're just doing this for the first time, usually I have people practice it on something neutral like the wall or the back of a flat or something like that, but it gives you a nice even technique. And this one still isn't as thin as I like it to be because it's giving me some trails, but that's all right. Go ahead.
There's other things you can do too. You can whack it on your wrist, but if you're doing a whole floor, you might not want to do that. So take like another brush or a stir stick and you can whack it on that. It'll give you a little bit. And another thing I like to do is when it's really like a very loose paint is I like to shake it like this. I don't think this is loose enough, but sometimes it gives you almost like a raining effect. Sometimes that will help you with a little bit more control and getting an even coverage.
Let me see if I got this better now. That's better technique. There we go.
Love it.
All right, and that's a spatter technique. All right, so the next step in this whole process is to take some of the scene painting techniques that we learned and kind of combine them all together into creating different scenic surfaces and things we're going to be actually used on stage. So what I'm going to demonstrate is a wood grain technique, all right? So I'm going to be taking two different colors. This is a golden yellow and a tan, right? And I'm going to be taking those and I'm going to be blending those across the surface here, right? So I'm going to take two of these colors here, and then I take the golden yellow and I will mix those together. So I'm going kind of a linear technique here of blending these two colors together. And what I'm trying to do as I do this is to try and mimic some of the different ways that wood grain works together. So this one is going to be kind of more of a flat wood grain, like in a paneling type situation, right? So I'm going to be doing some places where we have cut grain in there and straight grain and those kind of things. So it's mostly just this wet blending right in here for now, okay? And then I'm going to take my brush and just kind of drag over top of those and blend those together nice and smooth here. All right, so there's my base grain that I'm laying down, which actually turned out pretty good. It's looking pretty much like, very close to a wood grain. But what I want to do then is go in here and add some detail in it. And I'm going to use this brush. which is a distress brush. So I essentially just took a regular cheap chip brush that you can buy at Home Depot, and we cut chunks out of it, and this is what's going to give me my wood grain on here. So I'm going to work this into the brush and make sure that I don't have too much on there, and then gently over top of the surface I'm going to drag that across to give me my grain.
Ain't that beautiful?
Now that one I kind of ran out of paint, right? So what I want to do then is I'll start from the other side to kind of blend those together towards the middle in there. All right, so with every time I go across this with the brush, I'm really trying to work that into the fibers of this distress brush so that it'll give me a nice even texture across there. All right, so everything on this one is I'm working really pretty wet with the different colors. So what that means is that I'm getting a lot of blending between this top coat of what is a dry brush, which really, because everything's wet under it, is really becoming more of a wet blend kind of thing. But it's really working out pretty well to give me the grain that I'm looking for here. This one I didn't quite like, so I'm just going to go over it a little bit and kind of blend that in a little bit more to give me my wood grain. What do you think?
Beautiful.
There you go. And there's a little bit of an imperfection in the board right there, which made that spot. So with this technique of wood graining, we use a lot of wet blending on the base coat. There's a little bit of scumbling in there, and then a dry brush technique, which kind of was a combination of dry brush and wet blending to give me this wood grain technique here. So combining a lot of those different things we did in the demonstration earlier to actually create a technique here.
So another commonly recreated texture is marble. So I'm going to show you how to do that. First, we're going to start out with the scumble. And you can do a scumble with more than 2 colors. For this one, I'm going to do 3 because it's always going to give it more dimension. So we'll start with a couple grays. This one's a little greener, and the other one's just a little bit bluer. And then I'm going to scumble a little bit of white on that, and then I'll brighten it up a bit. We're going to actually put more white on it so we don't get hot. Now the key with marbling is layers. Every time, if you look at marble in nature, there's always just so much going on. So we can do that with paint by just layering on top of everything that we do. It's also about using your eye. So over here, I think it just needs a little bit more light. Might be a little darker over here. It's not, for marble, it's not going to be even in tone all the way across, depending on what sample you're using.
Important in there as well.
Correct. So marble is a pretty fluid, typically a fluid looking texture, so we want to keep the paint as wet as we can. Oh, hello. Yeah, I did. So I'll take a spray bottle and I'm going to spray it down, and this is going to take away some of the paint, the brush stroke, and it kind of adds a little bit of a spatter and softens everything up a bit, if you can see here. So if I end up getting a really wet spot here, sometimes we use alcohol, sometimes there's a lot of different tools you can use to achieve this effect. So for now, we're just going to use water, and everything is going to react differently. But it's going to start kind of pooling and clouding up in here, which is what we want. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a clean sponge, and it's wet, and I'm going to lift some of the paint up in areas. So that's going to just give us another texture underneath everything. So you can see what that's doing here. It's just lifting the paint and almost blending it in certain places. So that's another thing you can do with marble.
One of the things I've noticed about marble is that there are as many different techniques for painting marble as there are scene painters that paint it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has their own technique and their own way of doing it, and almost all of them work pretty well. So.
Okay, so now that this layer is somewhat completed, I'm going to start doing some veining. And what you're going to do is you're going to take a thin art brush. I'm going to use this little guy. And you're going to take, I'm going to start with this bluish kind of color. And really lightly, I'm going to hold the brush at the end and just drag it along very lightly to create an idea of some veining. And see how it's still wet here from the water? It's going to make, that water is going to make it blend and do some really cool things.
And bleed into the other colors.
Bleed, yes, that's the word.
So an important thing also to look at is make sure you look at a piece of marble or a picture of some marble and get an idea of how the different layers and the veining and all that kind of stuff interact with each other. And that way you can duplicate that from real life.
And with veining too, don't be afraid to use different colors. You can highlight the veining as well. And what I'm doing here too is I'm just kind of using my imagination. Doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of people get afraid of painting because they don't want to mess up. You just put more paint on it. Okay, you're probably bored now. I'm going to get that one little spritz over. And now I'm going to add just a little touch of spattering. And that'll just add, there's so much stuff you can do with this, and I'm just showing you different options you might have. So I'll take some of this gray, just going to shortcut it. It's all about finding a balance between your highlights and lowlights. So I've got some lighter grays, some darker grays. Kind of got it all in there. That's basic marble. See this? It's called washing your tools.
And those are the basic scene painting techniques.
Thanks for joining us. Stay home, stay healthy.